My name is Lena Marsh and I was 31 years old, standing at the back of a reception hall in a dress my grandmother had helped me choose, watching my sister walk through the front doors in ivory, not blush, not cream, not the particular shade of off-white that people sometimes wear to weddings and claim was accidental, ivory, floor-length, fitted, with a neckline that had required a decision. My sister Cara was 34 years old and she had made that decision deliberately, the way she made every decision that was designed to be noticed, with full knowledge of what she was doing and complete confidence that the room would absorb it before I could respond to it. The room did absorb it. 200 guests, a receiving line, a ceremony that had ended 40 minutes earlier in a garden with white roses, and a justice of the peace who had the kind of voice that made vows sound like they were being spoken for the first time in history. 200 people who turned when Cara came through the doors and registered the ivory and looked at me and looked back at her and made the specific social calculation of people who understand they are witnessing something but have not yet decided what. I looked at my husband. Marcus had seen her. His expression told me everything about how prepared he was for this moment, which was not at all, and everything about how he felt about it, which was the particular helpless dread of a man who understands that the woman he has just married is about to have her wedding defined by her sister's dress. I looked at my mother. She was at a table near the window with her hand over her mouth and an expression I recognized as the one she used when Cara did something she had been asked not to do and had done anyway, and my mother was calculating whether to intervene or absorb. My mother almost always absorbed. I looked at Cara. She had found a seat and was accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server and scanning the room with the expression she wore when she wanted to know who had noticed. Everyone had noticed. I made a decision in that moment that I had actually made 3 weeks earlier, when I first understood that the dress was not an accident and had begun preparing accordingly. The decision was this. I was not going to let this evening become about Cara's dress. I was going to have my wedding, and when the evening was over, I was going to go home with my husband and let what I had already set in motion do what I had built it to do. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this really started. Not to the reception hall, not to the ivory dress, further back, to a childhood in a house where the rules about who mattered most had been set before I was old enough to understand them and had never been revised. My mother raised 2 daughters in a 3-bedroom house in a mid-sized city where the kind of family we were was visible from the outside and considerably more complicated on the inside. She was a capable woman who had worked as a hospital administrator for 30 years and who had, somewhere in those 30 years, developed the specific administrative skill of managing conflict by deferring it. In the hospital, this was practical. In our house, it meant that the more persistent person usually won. Cara was always the more persistent person. She was 3 years older than me and she had the particular quality of some firstborns, not all, but some, of understanding intuitively that the household's attention was a resource and that she had arrived first and therefore had the stronger claim. She was not always unkind. She was sometimes genuinely warm, the specific warmth of someone who has decided to be generous in a particular moment because generosity cost them nothing, but the warmth had a temperature dial that only she controlled, and the dial was calibrated entirely around what Cara needed from any given situation. I grew up in her orbit, not in her shadow exactly, because I was not invisible. I was present and capable and had my own qualities, but the family's emotional weather was always Cara's, and I had learned to dress for it the way you dress for weather you have no power to change. Marcus came into my life at 27. He was 30, a structural engineer, the kind of man who explained complicated things simply and laughed at his own jokes approximately 4 seconds after everyone else did, which was endearing in a specific way I cannot describe except to say it made me feel safe. We dated for 2 years and he proposed on a Sunday morning in the kitchen with no ceremony at all, no ring yet, just him setting down his coffee and saying, "I think we should be married," and me saying, "Yes," and the two of us sitting there in our pajamas understanding that something had just happened that required pancakes. Cara had dated Marcus first. Not seriously. That is what everyone said, including Marcus, including my mother, and to be fair to all of them, the facts supported it. They had been on 4 dates 3 years before I met him, which predated my relationship with Marcus by a full year. They had ended things mutually, according to Marcus, because there was no particular momentum. According to Cara, because he was not ready for what she had to offer. I want to be honest about what I knew and when I knew it. I knew about the 4 dates before Marcus and I became serious. He told me on our 3rd date, not because he was obligated to but because he believed in transparency and also because he understood that in a city the size of ours, the information was available and the decision to withhold it was its own statement. I processed it. I asked my questions. I decided it was a manageable fact and not a reason to walk away from something that felt genuinely right. Cara had been fine about it when I started dating Marcus. Fine in the specific way she was fine about things that she was not actually fine about but had decided to manage strategically rather than address directly. She had been warm at family dinners. She had asked polite questions about how things were going. She had given no indication, in the year and a half of my relationship with Marcus before the engagement, that the 4 dates 3 years prior were anything other than the minor historical footnote everyone had agreed they were. The engagement changed the temperature, not dramatically, not in a way I could point to in a single conversation. The warmth calibration shifted in the specific way it always shifted when Cara decided something had happened that required a response. Comments appeared that had not appeared before. Questions about whether Marcus and I had really thought things through. An observation at Christmas dinner that Marcus seemed like someone who needed a certain kind of woman and that she hoped I was ready for that. My mother had changed the subject. I had filed the sentence away. The wedding planning was when the temperature became genuinely cold. Cara did not offer to help plan the wedding. She was asked 3 times over 4 months and she declined each time with reasons that were plausible in isolation and which added up, in aggregate, to a decision she had made before the first ask. She did not come to the venue viewing. She did not come to the cake tasting. She was invited to the dress appointment and she came, sat in the chair they provide for guests, and spent 45 minutes on her phone before saying she had somewhere to be. She was pleasant about all of it. That was the thing that was hardest to explain to anyone who was not inside it. She was always pleasant. Pleasantness was the delivery mechanism. The dress situation revealed itself 6 weeks before the wedding. My cousin Dana, who had been at a dinner with Cara and a group of mutual friends, called me the morning after and said, "I need to tell you something." She told me that Cara had described, in reasonable detail, the dress she was planning to wear to my wedding. Ivory, floor-length, fitted. Dana had asked whether Cara understood that wearing white or near white to a wedding was generally understood as a specific kind of statement. Cara had said she thought it was a beautiful dress and that she did not believe in outdated rules. I hung up with Dana and I sat for a moment. Then I called my mother. My mother said she would talk to Cara. I said, "When you talk to her, I need you to be specific, not a suggestion, a clear statement that this is not appropriate." My mother said of course. She called me back 3 hours later and said that Cara had been defensive and that she had said she would think about it and that she was sure Cara would make the right decision. My mother had been managing conflict by deferring it for 30 years. She was not going to stop 6 weeks before my wedding. I had known, when I called her, that this was the likely outcome. I had already decided, before I made the call, that I was going to operate from that assumption rather than the optimistic one. And I had already begun the preparation that I will describe to you now, because describing it in the right order is the only way it makes sense. Here's what you need to understand about the house. My mother had lived in the house on Birchwood Avenue for 26 years. She had bought it when Cara was 8 and I was 5, with money from my grandfather's estate and a mortgage she had serviced alone for 20 years before paying it off. It was a 3-bedroom house with a garden she maintained herself and a kitchen she had renovated twice and a structure that was, by any reasonable metric, entirely hers. 3 years before my wedding, my mother had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that affected her mobility in ways that were unpredictable and occasionally significant. She had spent 2 years managing it with the same administrative competence she brought to everything, adjusting what needed adjusting, refusing to adjust what did not need adjusting, and declining to discuss it as a limitation in any context where she felt the discussion was not productive. The relevant part of this is what happened at the end of that first year of her diagnosis. Cara had been living in an apartment across town. Her lease came up for renewal in November of that year and she told my mother, in a conversation I was not part of but heard about from my mother afterward, that she was considering moving back into the house. To help out, she said. Now that you are dealing with the health situation, it makes sense for family to be close. My mother had said yes, because my mother almost always said yes to Cara. Cara moved in December, not into her old bedroom, which she said was too small for her current furniture, into the larger bedroom that had been used as a guest room. She brought a moving truck full of possessions and installed them with a thoroughness that made the guest room look permanently occupied rather than temporarily inhabited. She contributed to household expenses in the first 2 months and then less in the 3rd month and not at all from the 4th month onward, with reasons that were plausible in isolation and which I recognized from a pattern I had been observing my entire life. More relevantly for this story, she did not help my mother in any of the ways she had framed her move as helping. My mother still drove herself to appointments. My mother still maintained the garden. My mother still cooked the meals and managed the house and did the things that needed doing, with or without her mobility varying, because my mother was who she was and the things needed doing. What Cara had done, I understood by the time my wedding was 6 weeks away, was moved into a rent-free situation that she had justified to herself and to my mother as caregiving, and that was, in practice, a comfortable arrangement that cost her very little and cost my mother considerably more. I had been thinking about the house for months before the wedding, not with anger, or not only with anger, with the specific clarity that comes from watching a situation develop long enough to understand what it is and what, if anything, you can do about it. Here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever watched something unfair happening to someone you love, love, something that is happening too slowly and too plausibly for anyone to point to cleanly, and understood that the only effective response was a patient one? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And subscribe so you are here for the part that Cara did not see coming, because the toast she gave at my wedding reception was only the second most significant thing that happened that evening. The first most significant thing had happened 3 weeks earlier. My mother had a lawyer. His name was Gerald Park, and he had handled her affairs, including the house purchase and her will and her estate planning, for 20 years. I had met him twice, briefly, at family events that required an estate attorney. I called him 6 weeks before my wedding and asked to meet. Gerald Park was 62, careful, and the kind of attorney who listened completely before speaking. I told him everything: the diagnosis, the move-in, the caregiving framing and the caregiving reality, the lease that Cara did not have, the contribution to household expenses that had stopped, and the wedding that was coming, with a dress that had been described in enough detail to my cousin that I was operating from the assumption that the description was accurate. I told him I was concerned about my mother's situation in the house, not about the wedding specifically, about the pattern I had been watching for 2 years that the wedding dress had clarified for me. Gerald Park listened to all of it. He asked several questions, all of them practical and specific. Then he said, "What outcome are you hoping for?" I told him. He said, "Let me tell you what is possible and what is not, and then you can decide what you want to do." He told me that since Cara had no lease and no formal tenancy agreement, her status in the house was legally precarious. She was a licensee at best. The house was my mother's, in my mother's name, with no legal obligation to provide Cara with anything beyond a reasonable notice period to vacate. He said that if my mother chose to ask Cara to leave, the legal process was straightforward. He said the more complicated question was what my mother wanted. I said my mother was not going to ask Cara to leave unprompted, but I believed, based on conversations I had been having with her for 6 months, that my mother was increasingly aware of the imbalance in the arrangement and increasingly unwilling to name it because naming it required a confrontation she did not believe she was capable of having alone. Gerald Park said, "Would your mother be willing to have a conversation with me?" I said I thought she would. She was. I want to be careful here about what happened next because I have thought about it from every angle and I am still certain that what I did was right, and I want to explain it clearly rather than in a way that sounds like something it was not. I did not orchestrate my mother's decisions. I did not manufacture an outcome. I gave my mother information she did not have, specifically Gerald Park's assessment of her legal position and her options, and I sat with her for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon while she processed it, and I answered her questions honestly, and I told her that whatever she decided I would support her, and I meant it. My mother processed it for 2 weeks. She had the conversation with Gerald Park that I had arranged. She had 2 additional conversations with Gerald Park that I was not part of. And on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks before my wedding, she called me and said she had decided to ask Cara to leave the house and that she had asked Gerald to prepare the appropriate documentation. I asked her if she was certain. She said yes. She said she had been trying to find a way to say it for 18 months and that having a lawyer tell her what her options were had given her the language for something she had already known she needed to do. She served the notice the following Thursday. Gerald handled it. Cara had 30 days. The locks were changed the day after the notice was served, at Gerald's recommendation, as a standard protective measure in situations where the relationship between the homeowner and the departing occupant was complicated. My mother had agreed to this. The new keys were given to my mother only. Cara did not know, on the day she walked into my wedding reception in an ivory dress, that the locks on the house she had been living in for 2 years had been changed 3 weeks earlier. She did not know that she had 14 days left on her notice period. She did not know that the guest room she had filled with her moving truck full of possessions was no longer hers in any sense that the law recognized. She knew about the dress. She had decided the dress was a statement worth making. She did not know I had already made a larger one. The reception moved through its phases: cocktail hour, dinner, the first dance, which Marcus and I had practiced approximately 0 times and which went better than expected because Marcus turned out to have a quality I had not previously discovered, which was that he was a genuinely good dancer when nobody was watching and a slightly anxious one when they were. The toast began at 8. My mother spoke first. She said the things a mother says, with the specific emotion of a woman who had been holding a number of things for a number of weeks and had decided that her daughter's wedding was the right place to let at least some of them go. She cried at the end. I held her hand across the table. My maid of honor spoke second. She was funny and warm and said one thing about me that was so accurate it made everyone who knew me laugh and everyone who did not know me lean toward the person beside them and ask what the story was. And then Cara stood up. She had the microphone before anyone had formally given it to her. She had the particular ease of someone who has decided the floor is theirs and is simply taking it. She began with the standard opening: how long she had known Marcus, what she remembered about him. She said he was a remarkable man. And then she said that she wanted to be honest with the room, because she believed in honesty, especially at important occasions. She said that she and Marcus Marcus had a history, that they had been close once in a way that she had thought at the time might be something significant. She said that life had taken them in different directions but that she wanted to acknowledge, in front of everyone, how much she had cared for him. She raised her glass. She looked at Marcus. She said she wished him every happiness. She did not look at me once during the entire toast. The room had the specific quality of 200 people deciding simultaneously whether what they had just witnessed was what they thought it was. I looked at Marcus. His face was the face of a man who had heard something he did not understand and was working out how angry he was allowed to be in front of 200 guests at his own wedding. I looked at my mother. She had set down her glass. Her expression was the one I had been watching my entire life, the one that was trying to decide whether to intervene or absorb. And I watched her, in the space of about 3 seconds, make a decision I had not expected. She did not absorb. Her jaw set. She looked at Cara with an expression I had never seen my mother use on either of her daughters. I looked at Cara. She was sitting down, satisfied, setting her glass on the table with the particular care of someone who has done what they came to do. And I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage. Not the sharp cold I had felt in the 6 weeks of preparation. Not triumph, though the preparation had been thorough and I knew what was waiting for her at the end of her 30 days. I felt sad. Sad for the specific reason that this was my sister and she had chosen to spend my wedding making it about herself, and there was nothing I could do about the sadness of that the lock changing would fix. I looked at Marcus. He was looking at me. He reached across the table and took my hand and said, quietly, just for me, I love you. Are you all right? I said, I will be. He said, good, because this is our wedding and I intend to dance again. I laughed, the real kind, and we danced again. The morning after the wedding I woke up in a hotel room with my husband and the specific disorientation of a person who has been holding a great deal for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Marcus made coffee from the small machine on the dresser and brought it to me in bed, and we talked about the previous evening with the honesty that the morning after allows. He told me what he had felt during the toast, which was a combination of anger and embarrassment and a specific frustration that he could not say what he wanted to say in front of 200 people. He asked me if I had known it was coming. I said I had not known about the toast specifically. I had known that Cara was going to do something. He said, what did you do about it? I told him, all of it. Gerald Park, the Saturday afternoon with my mother, the notice, the lock, the 14 days. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when did you start this? I said, 6 weeks ago when my cousin called about the dress. He said, you spent 6 weeks preparing for this and you did not tell me? I said, I did not want you to spend 6 weeks angry at my sister before my wedding. I wanted you to have a wedding. He thought about that. Then he said, that is either very considerate or very Lena. I said, those are not mutually exclusive. He laughed. The second kind, the bigger one, the one that comes later. And I understood, in that moment, that we were going to be fine. Cara called me 2 days after the wedding, not to apologize. I want to be clear about that because the story might suggest she called to apologize and she did not. She called to ask about the notice. She had spent the 2 days after the wedding, as I understood it from my mother's account and from Cara's subsequent calls to my mother, in the process of understanding that the notice was real and that the 30 days were real and that Gerald Park was a real attorney with a real filing and that the locks that had been changed 3 weeks before her toast at my wedding were the actual locks on the actual house. Her call to me was not warm. It had the specific quality of a person who has just discovered that a situation they thought they controlled had been quietly reorganized without their knowledge and who was deciding which emotion to lead with. She led with grievance. She said she could not believe I had done this. She said she had been helping our mother for 2 years and this was how it was repaid. She said she had a right to know. She said I had gone behind her back. She said a great deal in the first 4 minutes of the call, all of it variations on the same architecture, which was that something had been done to her that she had not consented to and that this was the primary fact. I let her talk. I had learned years ago that interrupting Cara before she had finished was not efficient. She needed to complete the construction before she could hear anything that challenged it. When she finished I said 2 things. I said, the house belongs to Mom. It has always belonged to Mom. Whatever decision she makes about who lives in it is hers to make. And I said, Mom made this decision herself. I gave her information she did not have. She made the choice. Cara said, you manipulated her. I said, I gave her the name of her own attorney and arranged a meeting. What she decided in that meeting was between her and Gerald Park. There was a silence. Then Cara said, this is about Marcus. I said, this is about a 2-year arrangement that was described as caregiving and that did not involve any caregiving. She said, I was there for Mom. I said, when did you last drive her to an appointment? Another silence. Longer this time. I said, I am not interested in having this argument. Cara, the notice is real. 14 days from when I am speaking to you. Gerald has Mom's instructions. If you have questions about the process, you can call him. I said I hope she found somewhere good to land. I meant it, the way you mean things about people you love and are finished managing. Then I hung up. My mother called me that evening. She was shaken but steady, which was her particular combination when when she had done something that cost her. She said Cara had called her 3 times. She said the calls had been difficult. She said she had held her position through all 3 of them, which was something I had not been certain she would be able to do and which told me something about what the months of watching the arrangement had done to her own clarity. She said, I should have done this 18 months ago. I said, you did it when you were ready. That is the right time. She said, I am sorry about the toast. I said, it is not yours to apologize for. She said, I know. I am apologizing anyway. We talked for an hour. About the wedding, the real parts of it, the vows and the garden and Marcus crying during the processional which he had expressly told me he was not going to do and then done completely. About the dancing. About the dress my grandmother had helped me choose. About the things that had happened that evening that the toast had tried to overshadow and that I had decided were not going to be overshadowed. My mother asked me if I was angry at Cara. I thought about it honestly. I said I was sad. I said the anger had lived in the preparation and the preparation was done and what was left was something I was still figuring out the name for. She said, that sounds right. Cara moved out on day 28, not day 30, day 28, which told me the situation had clarified for her in a way that made staying the full 30 days feel untenable. She moved into an apartment across town. I know this from my mother, who had helped her find it, not out of obligation but out of the specific love my mother had for both her daughters even when one of them had spent 2 years in her guest room not helping her to appointments. That is the thing about my mother. She is consistent in ways that sometimes frustrate me and sometimes make me understand completely why she was who she was. She helped Cara find the apartment. She also did not offer to pay the deposit, which was new. The weeks after the wedding were the quietest I can remember in my adult life. Quiet in the specific way of a situation that has been charged for a long time and has finally discharged. The house on Birchwood Avenue was my mother's again in the way it had always been legally but had not been practically for 2 years. The garden got attention because my mother chose to give it attention rather than because she was doing it alone while someone occupied her guest room. Marcus and I settled into the particular ordinary happiness of 2 people who have chosen each other in front of everyone they know and come home on the other side of it. He learned quickly that I was someone who prepared for things without announcing the preparation, which he described in our first months of marriage as both reassuring and mildly alarming. I told him that was accurate. Cara and I did not speak for 4 months after the moving out call. The silence was mutual in the sense that neither of us reached for it. I was not avoiding her. I had simply, finally, stopped reaching, which is a different thing and which had taken 31 years to arrive at. She called in December, 4 months after the wedding, 2 months after the move out. Her voice was different in a way I noticed immediately. Not humble exactly, because Cara was not built for humility in the complete sense, but reduced. The specific reduction of someone who has been through something uncomfortable and has come out the other side having learned something they had not known before. She did not apologize for the dress. She did not apologize for the toast. Those subjects did not come up. She asked how I was. She asked about Marcus. She asked how Mom was doing and whether she had been getting to her appointments. I told her yes. I had been driving her. There was a pause. She said, I should have been doing that. I said, yes. She said, I am going to try to do better. It was not the complete accounting that the situation warranted. I knew that and she knew that and we both left it in the space between us without pressing it. Some repairs do not begin with the full accounting. Some of them begin with a person saying I should have been doing that and another person saying yes and both of them deciding that is enough to start with. We have coffee once a month now. Not often. Not warm. Not in the way we were when we were young and she was generous in the moments when generosity cost her nothing. Something more honest than that. Something built on the specific reality of who we are rather than on the performance of what sisters are supposed to be. She has not mentioned Marcus or the toast or the dress since December. I have not brought them up. There are some debts that do not get paid directly but that live in the changed behavior. And I am watching for the changed behavior the way you watch for changed behavior in someone you love and are not yet certain you trust. My mother as well. Her condition is managed. She gets to her appointments. The garden looks better than it has in 2 years. She has the guest room back and she has made it into something she has been wanting for years. A reading room with a chair by the window and shelves she organized by color because she had always wanted to do that and had never had the space. Marcus asks about my family with the interest of a man who has married into something complicated and has decided to be genuinely curious about it rather than cautiously distant. He asked me once, on a Sunday morning in the kitchen, whether I thought Cara had understood what she was doing at the wedding or whether she had told herself a story about it. I said I thought she had told herself a story. I said I thought the story was that she was being honest and brave and that the toast was a gesture of truth-telling rather than a performance of ownership. I said I thought the story let her do what she wanted to do without having to be the person who had done it. He said, do you think she believes the story? I said, I think she is starting to have some doubt. He nodded. He poured the coffee. He said, that seems like enough. It does seem like enough. Not everything. Not the resolution the story wants. But a woman who drove 4 hours to find the guest room she had occupied for 2 years locked from the outside, who moved her possessions out on day 28, who called her sister in December and said I should have been doing that, is at least a woman who is looking at the story she told herself and noticing the places where it does not hold. I organized my mother's new bookshelves, not by color, she had done that herself, by topic, which was her preference. We spent a Saturday afternoon moving books from stacks on the floor to shelves on the wall, and she made tea and we talked about the things we had not had the space to talk about for 2 years, about her appointments and the autoimmune condition and what she had learned about managing it and what it had been like living with Cara and what it had been like asking her to leave. She said, the hardest part was not the conversation. The hardest part was the years before it. The years of telling myself it was fine. I said, I know. She said, you knew before I did. I said, I saw it from the outside. That is different. She said, you gave me the language for it. I thought about what Gerald Park had said when I first called him. He had asked what outcome I was hoping for. I had told him. He had asked whether my mother would be willing to meet with him. And I had said, I think she would. She had been willing. She had been ready. She had simply needed someone to give her the information she did not have and the language for what she already knew. That was not orchestration. That was the specific kind of love that does the work in advance without announcing it and waits for the moment to arrive. My mother said, I want to do something for you. For helping. I said, you do not owe me anything. She said, I know. I want to do it anyway. She had talked to Gerald Park, she said, about the house, about the will, about what she wanted to happen to it when she was gone. She said she had made some decisions that she wanted me to know about, not to tell Cara yet, but so that I knew. She told me. I sat in the new reading room with its books organized by topic and a chair by the window and I held what she had told me and I felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific stillness of a situation that has been resolved not by a confrontation but by the quiet patient work of people who love each other well enough to tell the truth when it is needed and hold the rest until it is time. The dress is somewhere in Cara's new apartment. I assume she still has it. I have not asked. The toast happened at a wedding that was otherwise exactly what I had wanted it to be, which is to say ordinary and specific in ours, with vows and a garden and white roses and a justice of the peace with a radio broadcaster's voice and Marcus crying during the processional and the second kind of laugh and dancing twice. The locks on the house on Birchwood Avenue are still the new ones. My mother has the keys. The guest room is a reading room now. The garden needs attention in the way gardens always need attention when you are actually paying attention to them. And on Sunday mornings, in the kitchen, my husband makes coffee and asks about my family with the genuine curiosity of a man who has decided that complicated is not the same as broken and that the woman he married is worth the whole of what comes with her. He is right about that. He usually is, which is one of the things I was least prepared for and most grateful for about being married to him. That is my story. 1 ivory dress, 1 toast, 3 weeks of preparation, and a reading room with a chair by the window that my mother has wanted for years and finally has. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the patient response is sometimes the most powerful one. Drop a comment and tell me about a moment you chose the long preparation over the immediate reaction. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.